Hi, I'm Dominic. I'm an artist, curator and researcher based in the northeast of England. I run the Pixel Palace program at the Tyneside Cinema. For those of you who don't know, the Pixel Palace is a creative program that engages digital, new media, art and culture. The Pixel Palace is currently developing commissions, residencies, exhibitions, broadcasts, participation programs and artist-led live events that reflect upon cinema. It's placed within the wider art ecology and the evolving nature of digital media. I was previously based at CRUMB, doing a PhD where I explored some ideas I'll be sharing with you. This talk was nearly called "Or How I Learned to Do Anything Apart from Write a Thesis." So CRUMB stands for Curating Research Upstart Media Bliss. So previously had CRUMB in my title, and now I've got Palace in my title, so how cool is that? Anyway, I'm going to start with this guy, George, one of my favourite characters. Now, when I was researching open source, I needed some facts and figures to show how having lots of people from diverse backgrounds was a good thing for problem solving. And I came across the book, The Difference by Scott E. Page. That's the difference. And you have good old Scott. And it was a standard sort of day, really. I'd been procrastinating to the best of my abilities. I couldn't really find any more funny cat pictures on the internet. And my supervisors were politely telling me to apply the seat of my pants to the chair and set up my computer and do some work. So then I came across George, thanks to Scott E. Page. Now, Page used George as a way of explaining heuristics, or to put it simply, problem-solving strategies. I'll go back to George because he's such a handsome chap. For those of you who don't know, George Costanza is a particularly loathsome character from the hit US comedy Seinfeld. And Page describes an episode of Seinfeld where George realizes that every decision he's made in his life is the wrong decision to make. When he should have gone left, he went right. When he should have said yes, he said no. When he should have stayed, he left. And then on that day, George makes a decision. George decides that he'll do the opposite of everything he thinks he should do. And by the end of the show, he's moved out of his parents' house, he has a girlfriend, and he's got a job with New York Yankees. So this was a particular light bulb moment for me. It occurred to me while I was in the middle of all this research that as an artist, there was an amazing focus to be found in exploring the problem-solving potential offered by open source development strategies. The exploration could provide the critical basis for the work I would make, and open source could be a heuristic strategy for artists. Making work that explores open source was very revealing. I'll briefly talk to you about some of the exploratory work I made, and in a short while, and then I'll talk a bit more about the similarities between hackers and artists. Although, to be honest with you, this is an artificial separation these days, I feel. Artists are increasingly writing code, and coders are increasingly engaged in acts that would have previously been the domain of artists. There's Barbara. So, artists are often early adopters of new technology, and they're also increasingly evolved in its inception. One of the things artists do really well is to create novel, unexpected and meaningful new uses for technology. As Barbara London, the video media curator at the Museum of Modern Art, puts it in the introduction to the CRUMB book, which is very reasonably priced, by the way, a brief history of curating new media art, that while the startup phases of new technologies trigger excitement and innovative experimentations, as artists gain control over tools, they move on to a dialogue with content rather than hardware. I would say this process closely follows development cycles. At times, novelty places our critical judgment and taste in reserve. As the pace of change accelerates and diversifies, we need people with critical thinking skills, artists, to help us move our understanding beyond that of our current set of standards. Artists have always done this. From the first cavemen grinding rocks to make pigments, through to Renaissance painters mixing pigments with oil. Artists have always found novel uses for new technology. Today we're no longer moving paint across a canvas, we're moving electrons through space, and this is a complicated thing to do. As Johannes Gorbel put it during a discussion on the new media curating list, maybe new media art means moving electrons as material, condition and consequence for artistic works which are time-based. So as we see, art has become increasingly entangled with innovation. Artists and hackers have a lot in common, and they have interesting differences. They both engage in a creative endeavor. They both work in problem-solving environments. They often work in teams. One thing that should not be overlooked, though, is the desire to get into hack mode. So hack mode is described in the Jargon Dictionary, and the Jargon Dictionary is something you install. It's a dictionary installed on a Linux computer, but it's also available online to view, and it's quite a humorous tome, really, and it explains a lot of the kind of in-jokes amongst outcasts, really. So deep hack mode is described in the Jargon Dictionary as a Zen-like state of total focus on the problem that may be achieved when one is hacking. This is why every hacker is part mystic. The ability to enter such concentration at will correlates strongly with wizardliness. It is one of the most important skills learned during the larval stage, and sometimes amplified as deep hack mode. Being yanked out of hack mode may be experienced as a physical shock, and the sensation of being in hack mode is more than a little habituating. The intensity of this experience is probably by itself sufficient explanation for the existence of hackers, and explains why many resist being promoted out of positions where they can actually code. Deep hack mode is, of course, is not unique to coders or developers, whatever you want to call them. Artists also experience this, but it's often called flow, which is again a deep immersion in a specific task in which all barriers to productivity and creative expression dissolve, and concentration is uninterrupted. So this is a much desired and slightly addictive state for many of us. It could be why we do it in the first place. Much of our working day consists of getting obstacles out of the way so we can find this state. Things that break the flow and yank us out of deep hack are to be avoided. Things like reaching technical or creative impasse, not having the skills to complete a task, and running out of resources to do this. So let's go back quickly to the term hacker rather than coder or developer. Hacking is a way of creating a novel solution to a problem. It's not always a beautiful piece of code, although it can be, but it gets the job done. People who identify themselves as hackers often dislike artificial obstacles, things that make it hard for them just to get a day's work done, and many artists feel the same way. So in my own practice, I developed a number of pieces of work that explored key stages and protocols in the open source production process, i.e. formation of the initial idea, development and licensing, using a repository, the release cycle, and distribution. I drew parallels in the arts and identified key features such as freedom, sharing, and recognition. Two projects that I'll briefly touch upon now are the Random Information Exchange and the Shredder. I developed these projects with a team of artists and developers who I'd worked together with for a number of years, who go by the name of the Polytechnic, or ptechnic.org if you want to look them up. The Random Information Exchange explored social hierarchy within an unrestricted system or environment. The system evolved in later iterations to leave traceable project threads in order to see what conditions were necessary for an idea to flourish and what would cause an idea to remain undeveloped. The initial idea for Random Information Exchange was to devise a project that challenged a view encountered during what we had done as a group in the past when running workshops on open source. And often people would come to the workshops and say, yes, but I want the free version of Photoshop. Where's the free version of this? How can I get a free version of Word? So this was kind of not what it was about for us, really. So we needed to develop a project that actually, the aesthetic of the project was this exploration. So the challenge was to highlight these methods used when developing open source software, ensuring participants need not create a finished digital artifact that would require extended periods of time mastering software, packages and programming languages. The basic rules for engagement with random information exchange were developed in its first iteration. I don't expect you to read all those. But in its basic state, it was to devise a simple set of instructions to upload the instructions to the database. On uploading the set of instructions, you would receive a random set of instructions back, and you had to act on those instructions, create whatever object it was, or do whatever act it was that you were encouraged to do, and re-upload that modification to the database. So the exchange went through various iterations, and there were a number of funny occurrences during the project. Just to go back to this photo, this was the first time we did it, and I'd drawn the short straw, and I got a knitting pattern sent to me, and I can't knit. So I'd been sitting in the shop window, and this really funny guy came in, and I was like trying to cast on, and this guy came in, and he went, "You're doing it all wrong." I used to knit when I was a boxer, just to relax before fights. And he kind of grabbed hold of me and guided me gently through the process, which is great. And this is when we did it in New Zealand. And one of the funny things about doing it in New Zealand was how up for it everybody was. There's something about the pioneering spirit where everybody got something, did it, every single person. But this guy was the best. He didn't quite understand it when he first came in, and he went, "Okay, can you show me how to extract nitrogen from the air?" And I kind of looked at him and went, "No, but I can show you what I'm doing here," and I explained it to him. And then he got really excited, and she drew a huge diagram. He put loads of time into showing us how to run a car on tap water, which was fantastic. But I have no way of knowing if it works, because every time I try to get it out of the database, I get a crocheted disco skirt. So I'm not sure how random it is. I don't think it likes me very much. So this went through a number of iterations. And I ran this project because I was interested to witness, as project instigator, how other people took ownership over this project and what it was that inspired them to become project leaders in their own right. But this never happened. And my only conclusion to draw on that really is that it would have been bad form, because I was already project leader, and they would have been potentially forking the project, which is a kind of big no-no in development cycles. So then I had a radical idea for the next project, and that was to not have an idea. I decided that if I don't have an original idea, can I still be an artist? And can I still be creative without an original idea? Would the application of open source principles make this possible? So luckily, while I was in New Zealand, I met a chap called Julian Priest, who developed a project alongside David Merritt and Adam Hyde called The Shredder. And what they had done, it was part of a larger project called the Geekosystem, and they had taken outdated software manuals, shredded them, mixed them with coffee, used coffee with the idea being that was a staple part of a geek's daily diet, and they mulched it down and turned it into compost and grew plants in it. So it was repurposing it, and I just thought, that's a really good idea. Can I have it, please? And they gave it to me, which was really nice to use. So yeah, the artists involved, they were already programmers and developers anyways, so they had an understanding of open source. And they'd come to the area with an understanding of the principles, so that those principles in some ways were reflected in the actual work. So I took this back to England, and then I had a very fast opportunity to develop something for the AV Festival in Newcastle in 2010. And I only had something like a month, and that wasn't enough time to compost down this material. So I had a conversation, I'd been having a pint with a mycologist, a guy called John Robinson, and it became apparent that by mixing the mulch together, we could actually make a growing medium for mushrooms. So we developed this project in England. So we made some dump bins for people to bring their old manuals in, and we had a shredder. And you should have seen the glee on people's face, shredding old versions of Excel, whatever, you know, Photoshop 3, ripping the covers off and like ramming them into the shredder. So we then made this, we developed a system for growing the mushrooms, and we ate them, which was really nice. So this is most definitely an artist project, but it had layers of participation that was similar to those that are found in an open source software project. There was some shiitake and some pink oyster mushrooms. So the various roles were the project instigator was the person who comes up with the idea, the project leader, the gatekeeper, the participant, and the user. So the initial idea for the work came from the ecosystem, as I mentioned earlier, and the iteration arose from a felt need to engage with another artist's idea in order to explore the outcome and how recognition of skill worked within open source projects, and and that mixed with the freedom to modify and adapt. In terms of openness, this project has more in common with a Creative Commons project and say a coded piece, open source software project, because there's no code base for it. It's more about an idea. And however, there are parallels that can be drawn between organization of production methods and object-oriented programming techniques, because this project then went through various iterations, and I could unpick the various classes from this project and like remix them basically very quickly. And the IP was handed over freely, and that reflected again the development cycles and the open source ethos. There was a central repository for this project in the form of a wiki, and it was, although it was not because it was not a project that relied on multiple revisions of complex code. But one thing that we didn't carry through was to use a license, and I would argue that if you don't use a license in your work, you can't actually call it open source. It's public domain at best, and the open source license provides that. It's not just useful for legal protection, but it also provides that essential framework for sharing and working together as well. It's a really exciting read if you ever want to sit down and read an open source license. I'd recommend it. I genuinely would recommend it, actually. I'm laughing about it, but genuine. As part of my research, I spent a little bit of time at IBM in New York, and I had interviewed this chap here, Steve Lambert. There we go. And when I was asking him about open source, he kind of said, well, it's really just the oldest way of doing things. And he pointed out that really it's only now that other organizations and other people are trying to capitalize on this knowledge that we now need to apply licenses that protect that knowledge and make it possible for us to share it. So just to finish, so quickly back to wizardlyness. So aside from the complex debates and attempts to define open source, what we have is a process that can eliminate barriers and allow us to get into a focused state where ideas flow. It provides time and space for collaboration and shared ownership that artists desire. It can occasionally allow us to reach objectives through what may seem to the casual observer as by supernatural means, where we can gain an understanding of the macrocosm through our investigations of the microcosm. Thank you very much.